Well, it would have been a much more interesting morning if the Vikings had managed to complete what was looking like it was going to be the all-time epic regular season collapse. No team had ever blown a lead of more than 28 points in a regular season game. Now, the Bills-Oilers playoff game from years gone by is the postseason collapse of 32. Regular season 28 is the high water mark, and it stayed that way, fortunately for the sanity of everyone in Minnesota and anyone who is partial to the Vikings beyond that great state. 29-0 was the lead. The Steelers did everything they could to come back, and the Vikings did everything they could to let them come back. It really is amazing to think yet another game came down to the last play for Minnesota when they had a 29-0 lead. That in and of itself is inexcusable. Never mind the fact that they got the win. They were up 29-0 midway through the third quarter. Of course they should have had the win. The fact that they had to work for it, that they had to sweat for it, that they had to hold their breath for one last play for it, and but for an unexpected assist from a young receiver, and we'll talk about that later, there may have been other opportunities to score. That's inexcusable. That's inexcusable. That should have been one of those rare nights where you sit back and you just kind of enjoy garbage time. If you are partial to the Vikings. For a fan of football, it was great. For a fan of the Steelers, it was great. For a fan of the Vikings, they finally get a game where they can say, we get to enjoy the last 20 minutes or so of this. No, you don't. No, you don't. And I'm amazed that at the end of the day, it didn't get done because Ben Roethlisberger, to his credit, after getting banged around all night, made a hell of a throw. And I thought Freiermuth had it. I didn't realize it came out. I thought he had it. It's like, well, here comes the 2-point conversion. Here comes overtime, and we're going to have extra football, and the final score is going to be 44 or what would it have been, 42-36 or 39-36. But the ball came out. Harrison Smith made a great play on it. They actually guarded the front portion of the end zone 4 nights after they ignored the front line and got it done.
You know what, Mike? If they had blown that game, we'd be talking about two things today. We'd be talking about Chris Boyd and his stupidity instead of Chase Claypool and his stupidity. And we'd also be talking about did the Vikings fire Mike Zimmer today. I mean, this is just repeated that they can't hold these leads. In the Super Bowl era, they're the 15th team in history. To each of their first 13 games, they've led by at least 6 points. Those other 14 teams are 155-27. That's what they went. So the Vikings, for whatever reason, and it seems to me it happens after halftime that they're losing these leads, they can't make adjustments. Whatever it is, whatever the reasons, they're not making the adjustments to keep those leads, hold those leads, and it's escaping for them. And they were very, very, very lucky to win that game after having a 29-0 lead, or they'd be down in history, and I think we'd be talking about who's going to be the next head coach of the Vikings. And we still might be talking about that at the end of the season, but we're not talking about it today because they managed to hold on barely by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah, I think it's just been a stay of what I believe is coming. And last night, despite the victory, it's another example. Because if you're ownership, if you're the Wilf family, it's getting to the point where it's embarrassing. It really is. And I'm sorry if Mike Zimmer doesn't like to hear that. But come on, at some point, you've got to own it. You've got to wear it. You're tattooing it on your arm every week. You can't get mad when people point out your tattoo, one after another after another. And I wrote yesterday that if they had lost last night, Zimmer, could he be fired? I looked at the staff. All due respect, there isn't anybody on that staff that they could entrust the interim head coach job to. There isn't. Clint Kubiak, first-year offensive coordinator? No. Andre Patterson or Adam Zimmer, the co-defensive coordinators? No. They're as big of a part of a problem as Mike Zimmer is. Well, what do they say? When you got 2 quarterbacks, you have none. But what do you have when you have 3 defensive coordinators who can't hold a lead? You got a problem. There's no assistant head coach on the roster that I noticed. There's nobody. You just got to finish the job with Zimmer, and when it's over, unless they get to the round of 8, unless they get that far, it's done. It's just done. It's done. And if it's not done, then my speculation slash theory slash hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, that Vikings ownership is content to be just good enough. We're fine being in the playoff discussion up until week 17 or 18. We're fine being relevant past Thanksgiving. We're fine with getting to the playoffs every other year, every third year, maybe winning a playoff game every 5 years, maybe once a decade losing in the NFC Championship, because that's about where the franchise is right now. There's a point, I think, where you lose the patience of your fan base. And this constant dog paddle, it's got to end at some point. And the numbers that you quote just back that up. It's getting to the point where it's just something that can't continue. Even if they have to suffer through some down years to build something great, they never feel like they're going to be great. They always feel like they're just going to be pretty good. And pretty good is what gives you what we saw last night. Because when you're just pretty good, you screw around when you're up 29-0. When you're better than pretty good, you turn 29-0 into 42-0. And you know, I would say, my son and I were watching it, and one of his friends came over, and you know, too many field goals, not touchdowns. I mean, just opportunities to just drive the nail, and they didn't. And then once the scoring started for the Steelers, I knew it was going to happen. I've seen this movie enough times. But, oh, you're so pessimistic. No, I'm realistic, and I'm not going to blow smoke up anyone's butt. We are authentic and honest and genuine at all times. And when we see the cracks in the foundation starting to crumble, we're going to say so. And I saw it coming. And I am surprised at the end of the day that they held on, because it felt like it was going to be disaster, and it still feels like it was disaster.
Yeah, it did feel that way. It felt that way until you saw the ball on the ground, and then I was looking around for a penalty. Was there a penalty on the play? Because I was certain that Pittsburgh was going to get another play, and frankly, if not for Chase Claypool, they probably would have had another play. But Mike, you talked about they probably need to get to the final eight. That's the thing with this team. They're certainly capable of that. They can go win a playoff game. I mean, you saw what they did to the Packers. They can win a playoff game. The best thing that Mike Zimmer said yesterday after that game was that the way they played in the first half, they can beat anybody. The way they played in the second half, they can lose to anybody. And that pretty much sums up their season, because that's what they've done. That's who they are. And at some point, you are who you are. That's who they are. But they realistically have a chance to go upset somebody in the postseason. Now, I don't think they can put together a run of 3 games and get to the Super Bowl, but I do think they have a shot to win that first playoff game. They're good enough, but for whatever reason, they can't hold those leads. They haven't held those leads. That's who they are. They blow leads, and they let the other team come back, and they don't know how to squash them when they're down. Can they figure that out over these last 4 games? I guess we're going to find out if they can.
There's a very real psychological component to that as well, and it applies in 2 different ways. For the Vikings, they start to feel, here we go, here we go. Here it goes again. Yeah. And every time it happens, it reinforces that feeling the next time that the planets begin to line up. It also has a positive psychological effect on the opponent, because they're saying, here we go. Here we go. We got them right where we want them. They're beating us by 10 points with 5 minutes left. Here we go. They're up by 29 with 20 minutes left. Here we go. And that's where they got to nip this in the bud. And I don't know how detailed and how specific and how thorough the planning is, you know, the halftime adjustments. Something's not going right where they lose their focus. They just collectively lose focus. And we hear all the time, a coach is a reflection, or a team, got to get the saying right. The cliche has to be accurate. The team is the reflection of the coach. Well, if that's the case, we've got the full psychological workup on Mike Zimmer, because this team gets a lead and just puts it on autopilot, and then it crashes into the mountain.
Well, and you saw Ben Roethlisberger in the first half. They were all over. He didn't have time to do anything, and he had so much time in the second half. He was sitting back there. So I don't know what adjustments the Steelers make or what adjustments the Vikings made at halftime, but it certainly was a different second half, and it was a different offense, and it was a different defense for the Steelers and for the Vikings both. It was just two different halves, the tale of two halves right there before your very eyes. And, you know, the Steelers entered the game 6-1-1 in one-score games. The Vikings were 4-7. So you expected, because of the Steelers' record in close games and the Vikings' collapse in all those games, you just expected that the Steelers were going to come back and win that game. And when they didn't, it quite frankly was amazing. Like, you just expected them to come back and win the game and expected the Vikings to give it away, which, as you said, Mike, would have been the greatest collapse in the history of professional football in the regular season. So Vikings managed to hold on. Kudos to them, but they got to figure out, and very quickly, if Mike Zimmer and his staff are going to keep their jobs, how to make this thing work where they can play 4 quarters and win games and not give games away at the end. And if you're up 29 points, to manage to hold on to that better than what they did yesterday.
That first half was incredible. I'm looking at the numbers. The Vikings had 300 net yards. The Steelers had 66. The Vikings had 176 net yards rushing. The Steelers had 29. 124 passing. The Steelers had 37.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.